Hey, Pastor Steve Waldron. I hope you're having a great day in Jesus. More Science in the Bible, number 3 of the part 2, lesson 2. Okay, and we're looking at proofs of a young earth. Just a few more quick ones, and then we're going to look at some of Darwin's best arguments. So, Mendelian Genetics, George Mendel, who's like a Trappist monk or something like that, he did some genetic experiments way back like the late 1800s and maybe early 1900s, and what he showed is that acquired characteristics are not inherited. Acquired characteristics are not inherited. What that means is that, you know, if somebody dyes their hair, if somebody has their pinky amputated or something like that, the next generation, their offspring, has no greater chance of coming out with the like red hair if it was dyed red, or missing a pinky. And not just the next generation, but to 100 generations on out, because everything is encoded within the DNA. So even before Watson and Crick really saw what DNA was all about, came up with the double helix model and that incredible discovery they had, kind of knew from Mendel especially that did not happen. And so that shows young earth and that evolution did not happen. Secondly is spontaneous combustion did not happen. Now you have to remember, in Darwin's time, it was common knowledge that spontaneous combustion happened, that if you left a bunch of dirty rags over in a corner somewhere, that mice would appear. If you left fish out for 2, 3, 4 days over the course of time, maggots would appear out of the rot. And this was an observable thing that they just thought, well, this just happens. And so it was Louis Pasteur, where we get pasteurization from. I always like to make jokes about being a pastor and pasteurization. But anyhow, that he made a beaker called Pasteur's beaker, to where he was able to like have meat in a particular place, and it was shaped in such a way that oxygen could get to it, but maggots, no external forces could get to it, okay? And so he saw the meat decompose, or the fish decompose, and maggots did not appear. And that was a huge thing, and they immediately realized this was a threat to the theory of evolution, and people like Blavatsky and Annie Wood Desant began to do curses on him. And this leads us to the laws of biogenesis. This is just a law of science, that life comes from life. Life does not come from non-life. And this is a law. This is not a theory. This is not the theory of biogenesis. This is a law of biogenesis. And that is something I do want to encourage you to really understand, is that there are differences between theories and laws. And so, like, there's laws of gravity, there's theories of antimatter, or the Big Bang theory. But again, so there's differences between laws and theories. And so this is a law of biogenesis, that life does not come from non-life. So the Big Bang would not be living and any of the ancillary materials until the creation of the first bacterium by electricity or lightning bolt hitting an ammonia molecule, according to at least one theory of the Big Bang, rather predominant at one time. I'm not sure if it still is. Nothing was alive at that time. So the laws of biogenesis definitely show that evolution could not have happened, and with genetic degradation and those type things, with the laws of biogenesis, that the earth is extremely young. Another is just a practical thing on the moon. When I talked about moon dust, I also mentioned crater creep, but I wanted to bring this out just a little more. Obviously, the moon has an extremely thin atmosphere as opposed to Earth, extremely limited gravity. That's the reason you saw the moon pics, the people bouncing up and down, even though Joe Rogan would say that was kind of all staged and all of that. I don't know if he believes in the moon landing or not, but anyhow. So with that, you have meteors obviously, you can see the moon is pockmarked with meteors, craters, and within that, over the course of time, that they begin to fill in. It just happens. And so if the moon was millions of years old, that most of the meteor holes on the moon would have gradually filled in. As infinitesimally small as that process is, once you extrapolate it out, millions and tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years, obviously it takes effect. But the moon still has craters with measurably and demonstrably very little creep, showing the moon is very young. There's many other, I'm trying to write a book on 99 proofs of a young Earth, and so obviously there's more. That's just a few of a young Earth. There are many, many more. Walt Brown has great proofs. Arlo Mullenpaul has great proofs. In the Evolution Handbook, great proofs. And in the CSM literature, Creation Science movement in the UK, a lot of great proofs there. Let's go into some of Darwin's best arguments. Now, I mentioned this in Proofs of a Young Earth, that Darwin's best arguments have all turned out to be wrong and fraudulent. Now, I'm going to go into kind of 2020 mode, and this is best arguments I constantly get in favor of Darwinism being online. And the first is variability within genetic structure. And this is the classic confusing of microevolution with macroevolution, or variation with transmutation, or becoming another species. And so God wrote into the DNA code, the genetic code, even though it has great specificity within it, that it can also have variability within it as well. Let's say your DNA code says that you're supposed to be 6 feet tall, for example. But let's say there was environmental conditions, such as a polio epidemic, or lack of nutrition, or a lack of a certain vitamin. Like in Africa, the lack of vitamin A causes many people, especially children, to be blind. So you may be supposed to be 6 feet tall, but due to environmental conditions, you grow beyond 6 feet tall. Now, let's say you live in a place where there's optimum nutrition. And I'm just going to tell you, I'm assuming that there are certain nutrients that are great for your bones and all of this. So let's say you have a super healthy mom that only feeds you the best of everything, and you live in a certain place without a lot of crop, topsoil depletion, and which is a very real thing. It's been said that our grandparents, their bowl of spinach had 5 times the nutrients our bowl of spinach does. And so that's the reason we constantly overeat today. It's because our bodies are constantly hungry for vitamins. Farming practices and things such as that. And that's the reason people chew on their pen tops, chew their fingernails, and it's because their body is starving for vitamins, even though they may be eating muy gordo portions, and that type thing. So let's say that he had just a perfect diet, perfect all this. Well, he may actually exceed his DNA growth by an inch or 2 or something, again, due to great environmental factors. The blindness, maybe somebody was supposed to be born with 20/15 vision in Africa because of a vitamin deficiency, that they end up having 40/40 vision. And so there's variability within a species, but there's never the transmutation. It is still a person, and so this would be very slight variations based on various environmental factors. And so that is one of Darwin. That's maybe the most it's just like, I'll just tell you, dealing with the Trinity, like I'll do videos, multiple videos on the oneness view of Jesus' baptism. And now I realize I'm doing a video or 2 every day, sometimes more. And been several hundred days, thank the Lord, with always video uploaded, thanks to Sister Fran and Brother Mallory and these amazing tech people at our church. It's amazing what God has raised up. But anyhow, well, so they've only watched one video, maybe two or something, and they're like, no. And it's like, oh man, it's so hard to go back and reinvent. And I don't know how to like post old videos on there. I'm sure there's some easy way. I don't know it. But anyhow, so that's a way with the variability with genetic structure. Secondly is Redshift. And Redshift is supposed to be like the silver bullet proof that the Big Bang happened. And what redshifting is as it is observed that stars and galaxies are moving away from each other, there's a certain redshift that shows the speed at which they're moving, which can then be extrapolated backwards to show the power of the Big Bang and how far these various bodies in the celestial world are from each other. But let's just say that there is many different theories on what the redshift is. And so the redshift, again, that is a theory by Edwin Hubble, whom the Hubble telescope was named after, whose fascinating biography. I think Ed Hubble wasn't a scientist at all. He was like hauling rocks up Mount Palomar Observatory in Southern California and began to look, and he just had a proclivity to be a stargazer and ended up being a very good astronomer. But if I'm not mistaken, don't quote me on his history there, but I read that many years ago. So the red shifting can be multiple factors, multiple things, but know that there is vigorous debate within the scientific community that very well could not, is possibly not the reason for the red shifting in the heavenlies. That there are other explanations out there, and possibly far more plausible explanations out there that would not only be consistent with creationism, but consistent with known laws of science as well. Long ages. And this was something they said, beside his Bible, Darwin also took, who was it, Cuvier's book, or Lyell's Principles of Geology. Charles Lyell was one of the first ones. He was still claimed to be a creationist and a Christian, but to say that geology showed long periods of time, that stratification, rather than being what's observable from a flood, when you have even a small flood, you have stratification on it, like I'm fascinated that the Sphinx has stratification marks, that it was one time submerged in water, which could mean it was pre-flood, could be something to do with the Nile River basin as well. But that he proposed it wasn't necessarily Noah's flood, but I think his actual view was that there were several cataclysms over the years, and the flood was just one of the latest. But the earth was millions of years of age. And a fascinating study that I have ran across is the lengthening of time, because it seems that obviously for evolution, when you have micro enhancements from a bacteria to human, a bacteria to a stegosaurus and all this, then the only formula that could happen is it must have taken long ages of time, billions of years. But in the 20s, they're estimating like 200 million years, and in the 30s, it's 400 million years, and in the 50s, you get to the billion, till you finally get to the 15.4 billion, 4.6 billion planet Earth today, 15.4 billion for the universe that we have today, because they realize all of these processes, and the basic formula is time plus chance equals everything. Or we would say God plus his word equals everything God spoke, and it happened. I do want to say this too, while I'm on that subject. There's a lot of people that don't think creation is even a doctrine worth fighting for. And I hear preachers all the time. It makes for great preaching, gets people encouraged, but it is not what's meant. They'll say, yeah, I believe in the Big Bang, God spake, and bang, it happened. Okay, we understand that. But that's not what the Big Bang Theory is, you know. It's something that is a direct attack. This is a cosmology or a theory of origins to try to write God out of the equation. So whenever you show things like lunar recession or solar decomposition or genetic entropy or symbiosis or syntropy, that organization of life and closed systems that could not have evolved, impossibility for your vascular system to evolve. I mean, you just couldn't. Partial vascular system is going to be splurting blood everywhere. Blood itself evolving is not going to work because it only gives life with very specific things, white blood cells carrying nutrients and many other things, immunology in there. And so the long ages is something is necessary. And so this is the reason they realized they could never have enough time. Statistically, Peter Stoner has shown this. There's just never enough time. So then they said the explosion of the Big Bang had to be so big it created multiverses, and we happen to be a unique universe in the multiverse that did speedily have life, and that's just the thing. And fourthly, Darwin's best arguments that I currently get are missing links. They'll find something and say this is definitively a missing link. Now, the thing you get into there is obviously with billions of years and slight variations over those millions or billions of years, you should have literally billions of things up a particular scale, moving up this scale. You should have that. And so even, let's say, the progeny for a bird, a cardinal, well, I mean, they may found out of one, something here and something here, like 2 out of a billion that they could argue could possibly be in the ancestry of a cardinal. Well, you're still missing. Everything in the fossil record is fully formed, fully filled. So you're still missing not just links, but the chains themselves. And so this is something that I find that is extraordinarily, it depends on what view you're looking at it, okay? So I had a guy confront me online the other day, and he said, well, there's missing links everywhere. He said, I'm a paleontologist from the state of Georgia, and there's more missing links in the state of Georgia than you're giving credit for. And he never gave any proof. He could have been a 14-year-old kid for all I know. That's the thing about the anonymity of the internet. You just don't know who you're talking to. And but he never gave any proof. He never gave any list of the thing. You can go on Wikipedia and see a list of supposed missing links. And but these are all theoretical. These are all propositional. We don't know that if they weren't their own species and became extinct, and that the creator just designed certain things, like we have, a hand and a thumb, and so, primate kingdom has that as well, that's just the best way for things to be. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's any type of congruity at all. Some of the, you hear these statistics, okay, man is 97% the same DNA as a chimpanzee, but what they don't tell you is all the other things that man is very similar to as well. That obviously they give very specific information trying to say that you're related somehow to a chimpanzee, when it could be just as well be a bunny rabbit and things such as that. And so it depends on the perspective you're looking at when you're looking at missing links. So if you say, okay, we have 500 for, thousands of species of animals and all this in missing links, then it's a paucity. So if you're constantly looking for missing links and you find a few that could possibly fit the bill, you say, I've done it. But if you were to look at it objectively and say, okay, this is what we should have, and we don't have any of that, you've just got a few little tiny, it's like having 4 or 5 specks of dust on Mount Everest or Stone Mountain. You just don't have anything. Again, it's all a matter of perspective. So that is some of Darwin's best arguments. Now we want to look at the worldwide flood, because so much happened at the worldwide flood. This is Noah's flood. Now the first thing we need to do is recognize that in Genesis 6, 7, and 8, when we get to the course of the flood, somewhere around 30 times the language seems to be very clearly that it is a universal flood, that this was not a local flood. There are a ton of books out there on the local flood theory, but there's a lot of science against it besides different sedimentations and things. First of all, water seeks its own level. So if to flood even a 10,000 foot mountain in the Middle East, well, it's going to be 10,000 feet around the world. Secondly, not only did the Bible say all over the world, every creature under heaven, everything's going to be flooded, everything under heaven. But if it was just a local flood, why didn't he just say, Noah, go to China, I'm going to flood this place? But he didn't do that. It was an ark. It was a huge ark. So what tends to happen is once you get a localized flood, you tend to look at the ark as a mythology, because this massive boat that is probably far bigger, because the cubit was probably far bigger before the flood under ideal systems. People were probably bigger, because we know flora and fauna that's constantly found. They call it megaflora, megafauna, constantly found. So, you're probably looking at a boat 650 feet that wasn't rivaled till like the Queen Elizabeth tube is made. And so it's not just going to just be on dry ground and then float all over the place. It's going to take a huge capacity of water. And if everything under heaven was washed, was in sin, and had to be devastated, had to be killed by God, then, only a worldwide flood would work. And also, if it's a type of baptism, does this mean sprinkling is okay if only partial immersion occurred? And it certainly does away with all forms of flood geology, such as Whitcomb and Morris. So the first thing we need to say is the flood is universal. It is also the only mechanism that can attribute to all of the fossils that are out there. Fossils tend to, things tend to decompose. And so if the flood did not happen, the flood would have been a perfect fossilization event. Without the flood, it's very difficult to see how fossils occurred, especially when you have fossilization in action, such as fish eating other fish, fish in a backward bent move, like it is a rapid fossilization, and that's a sign of suffocation in the fish kingdom. Mammoths being frozen with undigested daisies still in their stomach, a lot there, showing Siberia used to be warmer than it is now. And so if you don't have a flood, if you don't have a universal flood, the observable world becomes very difficult to explain. Also, in folk legends, there's 427 folk legends around the world. George Fraser, who's certainly writer of the Golden Bough, no friend of Christianity, has said that there are flood legends. And so this is something that was deeply imprinted on the minds of people all around the world. And there's so many different mythologies that are so close to the biblical narrative that it seems to be looking to that as a archetype of the mythology that gets distorted over time. And so, I was reading Greek mythology. Who was it? I want to say Judith Miller, but I don't think that's the name. Hamilton. Maybe Hamilton's Greek mythology, which was so fascinating to me. And because I consider, like Brother Mooney, Cassandra sometimes, if you don't know who Cassandra was, in the abilities they have. But anyhow, they've got a flood. They've got something that was akin, the theory of Atlantis with Plato. But in Greek mythology, they have something akin to a flood as well. There's basically a Noah in Greek mythology and all of this. So the flood is something that is a real starting point for creation science. And I wish we could go further into so many other areas of creation science, because there's so many other things like classifications and things. But just know Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is true. If Genesis 1, 2, and 3 are not true, then the gospel's not true. Because the last Adam came to restore that which the first Adam lost. And if Genesis 1, 2, and 3 is mythology, the rest of the Bible can be interpreted as mythology. And so science, falsely so called, the Bible says in 1 Timothy 6:20, avoid that. And hold the truth, buy the truth and sell it not, regardless of what anybody says. Study up on it, because I'm going to tell you, evolution has probably seen more people fall away from apostolic Christianity, to my knowledge, than any other thing. I would say the second factor is probably standards not explained properly, or even explained at all. Just live it and do what I say. And then, but first would probably be evolution, that people say evolution had to have happened. So defend the faith till Jesus comes again. Talk with you later in Jesus' name.